Well, it's a great pleasure to see you again, Terry, because I think our paths crossed 6 months ago, last October, and we swapped experiences and our research, and it's amazing how much we had in common.
I recall we were up until 1:30 in the morning.
We were burning midnight oil, and we could have talked forever on the subject and
Yes.
philosophical and metaphysical subjects. I started about 40 years ago when a gentleman changed my life forever with a perfect description of my grand from the other side of life. And it was intriguing to note the little personality traits that my grand had that he described that he couldn't possibly have known, and this was a complete stranger.
And that's a wake-up call.
That was a wake-up call, yeah, and even to the point where she used to call me my lad. She never called me Brian, it was always my lad, what would you like to eat for lunch, my lad, or when I was younger it was go out and play in the garden, my lad, and that's what he said, my lad, my lad, my lad. And he described 92-year-old with grey-ing hair, not grey, she was grey-ing, described her height, build and her little rosy cheeks, which he said I think is rouge, which was perfectly correct, so he had everything right. And that made me think, and as a design engineer I was intrigued from the mechanical aspect of it. How can a complete stranger describe my grand so perfectly and be so accurate?
Good question.
And considering she died years before, and I thought, well, this has got to be science. If my gran is alive somewhere, living in another dimension, then this is scientific, not religious mumbo jumbo. We're talking about scientific facts and figures here, and that intrigued me, and that's changed my life and made me search. And I researched a lot on life after death. I studied mediums, and it went from there.
So how old were you at the time?
35 years of age.
And up until that time you...
Never given it a thought.
Right, so,
No.
So you were stuck in the routine of going to work, earning a living and paying the bills. And
Yeah, the usual ball and chain. two young kids and a mortgage, and
then suddenly this guy comes along and
well, I was invited to go to a spiritualist church, and I didn't know, I'd never been one in my life, I'd never seen a medium, that was the result. He picked me out after about half an hour of giving clairvoyance to various people, and I was one that he picked out. And
So what was the next step? What did you do then?
I was intrigued because I wanted to know more, and I went to the meetings on a regular basis whenever we were over with my parents, and took the family with me, and I studied the mediums, and after a while, probably a few months later, there was a medium came on there, guest medium, by the name of Michael Gardner-Jones. Never seen him before, and he gave me a perfect description of my granddad on my mother's side, complete with his cheese cutter cap, his age, build, everything, how he died with a heart attack, and I was intrigued. And then he said to me, "Did you know you have healing ability?" And I said, "Well, I've been told so many times by different mediums they could." He said, "Yes, it's quite clear from your aura that I could see a lot of blue in your aura." And I said, I said, "Well, I don't know what to do with it." He said, "Well, come and see me afterwards," which I did. And he said, "I run a healing class and a meditation class." He said, "If you like to come along on Monday night," he said, "but unfortunately I live at Chesham in Buckinghamshire, which is about 20 miles away from where I was at that evening." So I said, "Well, that's a coincidence, if you like." I said, "I live at Chesham." "Where are you?" 2 miles up the road. I said, "Brilliant." So I went, and that changed my life as well. And it seemed to fit a pattern from my research, and I suppose I had a yearning to know if there was life after death was a fact and not fiction, and that was my path. And for 40 years that led me on to other things, and then the experiences started coming with the meditation. So how did you start then, Terry?
Well, I was I was 45 years old
Right.
when I seemingly stumbled across this pathway. I'd been in the transport industry. Came out of the army as a young soldier, came as a young man, and got a job driving buses, driving trucks, and then worked my way up through the profession. Transport management, transport consultant, and in 1983 I formed the first Computers in Transport conference and exhibition. So I was in the ground floor on using computer technology in the distribution industry, and developed and ran these conferences and exhibitions right up until 1990.
Mm.
When, in fact, the last one I did was in 1991, and those of us that have the memories of economic peaks and troughs. 1990 was a year of economic collapse at the end of Thatcherism, and this business that I'd dedicated my entire life to for the past 7 or 8 years suddenly collapsed, and I had nothing. So I bought a white van and a guitar and a tent and I went off to visit friends that I'd been introduced to in Crete. A very, very dear friend of mine had taken me on holiday to Crete in 1987. And she had a daughter who'd married a local man, and she wanted to meet her family in Crete. So that was my introduction. So when the UK economy collapsed and took my business with it, I thought, well, what do I do now? I just jumped in the van, called in to see my friend in Germany to pick up some gifts for her daughter and their children in Crete, and went off to Crete. And I found myself there asking myself and the universe, what do I do next? And that was when I began to have experiences that demanded explanations.
Of a mystical nature.
Of a mystical nature. And the
Right.
first thing that occurred was I had a persistent name going through my head constantly.
Mm.
The name of James. Now my middle name is James. I was named after my father. His name was James. But in that particular context, it was meaningless, and this name just kept bothering me over and over again. And then I had an irresistible urge. It was a compulsion, and I had never had compulsions before, but this was a compulsion. And I went to my campsite in the mountains and rummaged through my pack to retrieve a gift that had been given to me by my friend in Germany. When she'd given me the presents for her grandchildren, she gave me this gift as well. And I didn't really appreciate what it was until I retrieved it from my pack in the mountains, and I opened it up. And it was her well-thumbed copy of the King James Bible in English. Now, she was German, she was a Mormon actually. And she hadn't just read this Bible, she'd studied it, and it was full of markings and highlights, and it was well-thumbed. And it was then that I began to appreciate the value that she had placed on it, and she'd given it to me as a gift. And as I pulled it out of my pack, it fell open at the book of James. And that was a beginning. Because as I read that first few lines of the book of James, it said, if you seek wisdom, ask God and you'll get it.
Seek and you will find.
Those were not the words.
No.
The words were...
But that was the format.
if ye seek wisdom, ask of God. I can't remember the exact word, but ask God and you will be given it.
Yeah.
You will be given it. But don't have any doubts. I wish I could quote it for you word for word, but I can't. But the message is important.
Yeah.
And you're right, the message is seeking.
Understand, yeah.
Now, that created enormous impact on me at the time, but I didn't really fully understand the significance of it, because that marked the beginning of a journey that was still unknown to me. And I had no idea of the nature of the path that I was going to tread.
Mm.
But that's where it began.
Yeah.
1992, on a Cretan mountain, looking at the Book of James. I'd never been a religious man. And when I think back at the gesture that my friend Renata had when she'd given it to me, I didn't realise the importance of that gift.
Yeah.
But now, and I still have it. It's,
Yeah.
it's one of my treasures.
Yes.
But that was the beginning.
Can understand that. Mm. Yes, I think when you start on a pathway of inquiry, it sets in a yearning inside of you to find answers, and I think that is if you like, is your quest. I want answers to what I'm experiencing, or why what people call coincidences but turn out to be what we now know as synchronicity, that events fall into place. The right person comes along at the right time, and the right book comes along at the right time, and it is like drip feeding you with information.
Yes.
And which takes you a step further on inquiry.
That's right.
And if you've got an open mind, an inquiring mind, you want answers as to why, what, when, how.
But you see, the question I was asking at the time, what am I doing? What do I do next? You know, the business had collapsed, UK economy had collapsed. I didn't know what to do to earn a living. And there I was in Crete, homeless, with a van and a guitar. What do I do next? But that wasn't the only question I had, because I don't, like you, I'd been told that I had the gift of healing, and I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what this meant at all. But I began to, when I was told that, I began to experiment with it. I spent some time with some hippie types, if you like, some free thinkers, and people invited me to spend some time with them on the island of Gavdos, which is just, it's the most southerly point of Europe, just off the south coast of Crete. And we'd had a party, we had a good drink, singing around the campfire, you know, wonderful sense of freedom. And in the morning, everyone was suffering from hangovers. And just spontaneously, I started, I said to this guy, he was complaining, oh, I've got this terrible, terrible hangover. And I just stood behind him, put my hands on his temples, and within seconds, the pain had gone. And he went, my God, how did you do that? And then one of the other party, a young girl, said, oh, can you do that for me? I've got a terrible headache as well. So she came and sat down. I did the same for her, just massive. And the pain was gone, like a miracle. He said, how did you do that? Well, I just shrugged it off, really. But then, but that was a beginning. And over the course of time that I spent in Crete, people would present themselves to me. And I became known as the strange Englishman that lived in the mountains that took pain away. And people used to come and seek me out. It was really weird. And one day, a German friend of mine, a man who lived in Crete, he came and dragged me by the arm and said, you need to come and help my friend. He took me to the house of a Greek man, and this Greek man's wife had a bad back, and she'd been suffering from a bad back since giving birth to her last child, and she'd had this bad back for 8 years. And she was a beautiful woman, and the man loved his wife dearly, and they were both upset. They couldn't make love because her back was painful. So presented with this woman. I've got no skill, no knowledge, no training, no medical skill at all. I couldn't speak Greek and they couldn't speak English, so what was I to do? So I just sat her, this was on the street outside the house. She was sat on a straight back chair. I stood behind her, didn't touch her, just put my hands behind the back of her head. And within 30 seconds, she stood up. I motioned for her to touch her toes, and she touched her toes, and she smiled at me, and the pain in her back had gone. And her husband turned to me and he said, "What kind of magic is this?" I said, "Well, I don't know. It was miraculous. This brings to mind the healings of Christ, but you know, I'm just a truck driver out of work living in the mountains. You know, I'm not Jesus Christ. I don't perform miracles." So it was strange. It was weird, and so I needed answers. And it was then that I got this compulsion, this name James going through my head, and I was taken to the book of James, and I was being told, if you've got a question, if you need to know how something works, if you have an important question that needs answering, then ask God and you'll get the answer. Well, that was, 25 years ago?
Yeah.
And I can sit here and say to you now, Brian, that every question that I've asked about the mysteries, I've been given an answer.
I can understand that, because you had this yearning, the same as I did. I wanted to know if there was a life after death, and we both came into it through healing. And I was taught the laying on of hands by a very experienced healer, and also he was also an excellent medium, and he taught me meditation, Raja Yoga meditation, which is quite a profound meditation from East and the Orient, as you probably know. And after a few weeks of sitting in the group, a meditation group, I started to see faces.
Really?
Very clearly, as clear as I see you now.
Yeah.
And it started off with just the facial, just from there, they were looking at me, staring at me, and I could see every line on their face.
See, I've never experienced anything like that.
Right.
I'm fascinated by people like you that do see these things, because I don't.
Well, this didn't come to order. I didn't ask for it. It just happened that during meditation one night I started seeing, and then over the weeks I would see the fuller figure from there to mid-chest, and then over a few more weeks I could see the complete figure with the whole body, and they walked towards me, and then thoughts came into my head with an accent. I knew they were Scottish or had some Yorkshire dialect or something like that, and I'd asked the meditation teacher, Mike Gardner-Jones, what I was seeing, and he said that the Raja Yoga had brought out my psychic faculties.
Right.
And this is well known in Indian yogic philosophy, but they are told to ignore it because it's distraction on the path towards God consciousness, which is what Raja Yoga is designed to do. It's to raise your consciousness level so that your consciousness level can touch briefly the God consciousness level, which is the life force or the universal mind which sustains the whole of the universe. And that is the aim of Raja Yoga. Well, I was fascinated what I was seeing, particularly when people said next to me, said, "Oh, what you've just who you've just described was my father or my mother, or my grandmother, grandfather," and somebody over there would say, "Yes, I can recognise what you said, and what you just said was so true." And they did have a Scottish accent, they did have a Yorkshire accent, whatever. And I started to see children, and they were recognised, and that's how it developed. But the teacher, Mike, said, unless you want to be a medium, he said, I would ignore it. Well, as a design engineer, I had a very inquisitive, open mind, and I just wanted to know what I was seeing. Why should I see in my mind, with my eyes closed, faces of deceased people who, to me, as I saw them, was like looking at a television screen. They were very much alive. Anyway, so Mike explained that I was seeing the astral counterparts of the deceased people who were living in another dimension, which is all it is, which was the same as my gran was described to me, living in another dimension after she departed this earth. Well, I wanted to know a little bit more. I couldn't leave it there, and one night during meditation I had this rushing sound like a tornado in my ears, a whistling rushing sound, and all of a sudden I found myself standing at the back of the room when everybody else was sitting meditating, you know, like so. I could hear their breathing, and I felt, yes, I've got a body, and what the heck am I doing standing here? I don't remember getting out of my chair.
Right.
And I recognised everybody, and I was thinking, I had all my rational thoughts, and then I recognised the back of the head of somebody sitting in my chair where I'd been meditating, and I recognised me, the back of my head, and at that moment, for a split second, I thought I'd died.
Right.
And instantly fear set in, and I was pulled as if somebody had pulled the rope
Back into the body.
and I woke up in my chair like that, wide awake, heart pounding, and everybody else was still sitting like that.
So that was an out of body experience.
Well, I said, the teacher came round afterwards and asked everybody how they got on and what they felt, and I told him exactly what had happened, and he just said, "Oh, congratulations, you've just had an astral projection or out of body experience." I said, "Well, what does that mean then?" He said, "Well, you've just proved that consciousness can exist outside of the physical body."
Right. Now,
so I then got researched every book that I could find on astral projection. I found the Silver Muldoon and Harewood Carrington books on astral projection, and of course that went from there.
when I was studying for my doctorate at Bangor University, I rented a room in a student house, and the landlord was a fighter pilot stationed at Anglesey, where Prince William was. And he said to me, "What are you studying?" So I told him. So I'm doing a thesis on Frederick Myers and life after death and spirit possession and so on. And he said, that is absolutely fascinating. And he told me this story. He said, this is a common occurrence with us pilots. You can be flying an aircraft in supersonic flight, and all around you is just white noise. You're not doing anything, the plane is in level flight, and then all of a sudden you find yourself outside the aircraft, on the wing, looking at yourself in the cockpit. And I'm reminded of this from what you just said about being at the back of the room and seeing the back of your own head. And he said, this is a common occurrence.
Really?
Yes, with aircraft pilots, not just fighter pilots, but airline pilots as well.
Has this been documented?
It's been documented. It's called break-off syndrome.
Right.
And when he mentioned it, I went to the library, I did my research, and I looked it up, and I found one document on this break-off syndrome. But the pilots themselves, to them, it's an experience. When it first happens to them, they're shocked and dismayed, and they report sick, and they're attended to by psychiatrists, and they go through the process of ego reinforcement, and so that they're fit to fly and so on. But he said it's such a regular occurrence. They go into the officers' mess after they've had one and say, "Hey guys, guess what? I've just had another ubi." They call it an ubi. And yeah, it's a regular thing. So, but as I say, I've only ever discovered that it's been documented once. And when it was documented, It was a psychiatric investigator who was trying to explain it away in terms of stress, and the product of stress and neurological dysfunction and all kinds of scientific explanations. And I knew as soon as I discovered it that they were talking absolute nonsense, because I had already learned, as you have learned, that the out-of-body experience is proof that the consciousness survives outside the body, that the mind is not brain dependent. And whilst I was doing my research, and this was approaching the culmination of my journey of learning, if you like, if we go back to Crete, where it started, and I was asking questions, I was led down 3 avenues to get the answers I was looking for. One was to go to university and study psychology, where I learned nothing about these. What I did learn at university was scientific method, which is very, very useful, because scientific method can be applied to these experiences, which is not common knowledge, but it should be. Anything in the natural world can be investigated using scientific method, so I learned scientific method.
Which stops people being gullible.
That's right, yes it does. The other 2 avenues that I explored was, I was trained in hypnosis, because I found that on many occasions when I was administering to someone who was in pain, I just stood behind them, put my hands behind the back of the neck, they'd spontaneously go into a trance. So I needed to know how that worked. So I went down the hypnosis training path. And the other path I followed was similar to yours. I went to a spiritualist church to find out what this was all about. And those 3 avenues converged to bring me to where I am now. So I have a perfect understanding. Satisfies my questions.
That, Terry, I think is a common feature with most people that reach our level of research and personal experiences. They follow a similar path. It's stepping stones.
Yes.
And well, it's like a carrot on a stick, isn't it? You find one peep at the carrot, keeps moving, so you keep going and you move. And
you keep going until you're satisfied that all your questions have been answered. And what I've discovered from my inquiry is it doesn't just concern life after death. That's one facet of it. A life after death suggests that consciousness survives the death of the body. The out-of-body experience supports the idea that the mind, consciousness, is not brain dependent. And it also raises questions about, and this is what particularly fascinates me, questions of mental health and and emotional stability. People who hear voices, are they mentally ill? Are they having hallucinations, as medical science would have us believe? Or are they actually hearing the voices of spirits?
deceased people.
Deceased, not just deceased people, but demonic. As well, non-human.
Non-human, yes, I understand. Yeah.
And so my inquiry led me down the path of inquiring into the phenomenon of spirit possession.
Yes, it's talked about a lot in various religious literature as well as philosophical literature.
And it's dismissed by modern thinking.
Yes, thousands of years of happening.
Yeah.
And
you can't just dismiss it.
No, because I'd noticed that many serial killers, for example, hear voices telling them to kill.
Yes. And it's my firm belief that these people are influenced by discarnate spirit entities.
Yes.
And not just my research into this, I have practical experience of this. I've encountered these entities, and my work now principally is in helping people relieve themselves of these destructive entities. So I know they exist.
Yeah. Well, I've called it hijacking, where an earthbound entity or a dark entity from the lower astrals hijacks the body of somebody that's either alcoholics or drug addicts, or somebody who's got a depraved mind. Like minds attract like minds.
Yes.
And there has to be something in the individual that is common to the personality of the spirit that has hijacked their body.
This leads us down a road now where there are umpteen questions that need to be addressed and explored and answered, and we can perhaps continue with that later on, because at the moment I'm beginning to feel that I really need a nice cup of tea. If that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine with me. Yes.